game. So I do think that's like a little interesting curveball that you can throw into the mix. But you got to love analyzing Mage on any kind of level, and then it cuts to the game, and everything you said is borderline irrelevant because Mr. Blue Card has appeared in the hand for the Mage player.
Yeah, and arguably in this matchup, and honestly a lot of matchups, the other blue card for now, which is the Ice Barrier as well, having that on 3. You aren't really short of targets in this matchup for those Brain Freezes and the Flurries as well. So it's not like it's a huge deal having Ice Barrier in your opening hand, but in a lot of other matchups where you can't rely on those minions being there as heavily, then Ice Barrier, at least I have found myself keeping it quite a lot, especially with Incantus Flow already sitting there. And it's just good versus Hunter anyway. He's going to throw it, just dig for something a little bit more proactive, and yeah, okay. Okay.
Hello? I've never had this hand. Is there ever a... I mean, apparently, yes. I was my brain tells me to do this, but I've never, like, had this opening hand and actually stopped to think about it for 30 seconds, you know? So I was just kind of saying what was on my mind, but Viper seems to agree.
Yeah, I was going to bring this up as well. I was going to ask you what you thought of it, because although it might look weird, because you would imagine that Viper's going to Incantus Flow again next turn.
Yes.
Oh, but that's 2 Arcane charges for your quest. It doesn't matter, because Arcane has, you know, one of the most playable sets of cards in the deck, because Fire can half the time need a target. Frost, of course, is a difficult one to use, but Arcane, that there's so much that you can proc whenever you want with the likes of Primordial Studies, with any of the card draw as well. There are tons of options, so I feel like Viper can, you know, waste the proc on the quest, no problem at all. But here, the Neophyte has forced him onto it at least, so there's one more card that he's going to draw that isn't going to have the double reduction. What a shame.
Don't know what you mean. He just curved out perfectly as far as I'm concerned. This plays around Neophyte, though. That's one of the reasons to do it, right? If you want to look at it that way. Because if you just play Quest on 1 and they go Neophyte on 2, you're not playing any Incantus Flows by this point in the game, right? So Viper still does end up a whole Incantus Flow ahead, playing around Cult Neophyte in that way. It's kind of interesting.
Can he double proc this turn? I'm not adding up the numbers right. Surely he can't, can he now? He doesn't have second fire. He was getting close to it, though. It's pretty close to just double proccing the quest.
Yeah, I mean, Hot Streak is a hell of a card for cheating out multiple questline procs.
Yep. And this is the thing as well that I think players will fall into a bit of a trap with Mage is, oh, well, if I activate my quest super fast, like, that's how I win, right? Then I can kill my opponent, which on a certain level makes sense. But against these hard aggro decks, I think there's a lot of value in taking a turn off, maybe even 2 turns off, because the later in the game you get, the more mana, the more card draw you generally have access to. And that means where you can just proc like the quest twice in 1 turn and still have it done at a reasonable pace. Whereas if you rush it kind of blindly and avoid or ignore the minions that are already on board pushing you down, it doesn't matter if you can proc the quest a little bit quicker, because you're normally dead at that point.
Confusing turn from Viper. I will choose my words very carefully here. Obviously, so he used Hot Streak to proc the quest, right? Which is a little bit unusual because Hot Streak costs 0 and it's only this turn that it gives you the discount. Now that does make some sense because he then wanted to play the Arcane spell in Incantus Flow after having procced the quest, right? So now his Arcane tick has gone onto his stage 2. However, off the quest, he then drew another fire spell in Ignite, which was discounted and is now no longer discounted because it's not the same turn anymore, which he could have just played on the 3/4 Mankrik. 4-0 mana on that turn. I don't know if he roped out. I don't know whether he turned it down deliberately because he had Guild Trader in his hand or something like that. But there were just a few elements of that turn that looked slightly confusing from my perspective.
And there's also, and this is probably way too overthinking it here, but there's also a thing where if he played Ignite, he shuffles another Ignite in the deck, and that means he's got more chances of not drawing some of the other cards he might need, like Fire Sale.
Yeah,
for example. So I know it's really small, and again, you know, maybe it's just deal the damage to the minions so it's easy to kill them off later is a plan, but it does add a card to your deck effectively as well. And I think Viper is really looking for a fire sale very, very soon. Or maybe even a brain freeze at this point.
Just take Flurry to reduce max damage. Is the card draw important? Like, you have Auctioneer, Biscuit, Double Flow. Is that all the card draw you need? I think Viper says no.
Yeah, I think I like Grandmasters.
Very nice. Okay. Fire Frost are the schools he's still looking for, but probably still just ends up taking a Devolving Missile here, even though he's tripling up on Arcane at that point.
And now we've not talked too much about Floki's turns, of course. He is just doing the hunter thing, being as aggressive as possible. But it is getting to the point now where he has to just work out exactly how much damage he can push to set up the earliest lethal. And a lot of that normally revolves around pressing hero power. But I think getting this Rinling's Rifle up kind of negates it with the double swing anyway, especially whilst Ice Barrier isn't a factor at this moment in time.
Cage's only playable one. Freezing and Explosive are both going to do absolutely nothing in this matchup. Freezing can maybe allow you to ignore the Varden several turns down the line, but outside of that, I feel like if it gets to that point and you're not immediately killing Viper, the game's over anyway because of his Auctioneer build. Ice Barrier's a really nice draw there, actually.
Yeah, especially because... Wait a minute. Especially because Floki's not at the point in the matchup where he can afford to pretend Ice Barrier isn't there and just go with spells to win the game. He still has to push with these minions, I think, even though they've been devolved.
No, what? Wound Prey? Would that have been the dream there? Was it even good to Procto your Octo here? I'm not even that sure.
I don't think so, honestly. What I am interested in seeing if he goes for Rhino and a minion here, or if he goes for just one minion and hero power, and then he has a guaranteed minion for next turn with Piercing Shot.
Right.
He could go all phase, play the Initiate, hero power, because there's no target for the Rhino anyway, and then next turn he has Marcel Cup, Piercing Shot the Marcel Cup for +5, and then hero power again.
So it's 24, he's pushing 5, so he's down to 19, and you are hero powering with your line, so he's at 17. You then have, what, you're showing 9, 10 the next turn, plus hero power 12, and then Piercing Shot doing 5. So that would technically be a 2-turn lethal setup, yeah.
But the good thing here as well is, against Mage, although it might be, oh, play minions onto the board for freeze, well, Flurry's not that good when you have 7 minions on board, right? So there are upsides to having this Rhino there as, one, a difficult-to-kill minion, especially pre-quest for Mage, but also just 7 minions are hard to control for the Mage removal and freeze here.
You would love second Mana Biscuit here if you were Viper. Mana Biscuit is going to cost 0 even for the playable part, which means the actual Biscuit would ramp him all the way back up to the Spring Wall.
Oh.
There it is! Oh, he gets to Spring Wall this turn! This is the nuts!
It's so much mana! And now the Rhino is frozen as well, so that's a huge chunk of damage gone.
Yeah. So much mana now. Doesn't hit the Auctioneer, even with the second Auctioneer in the deck. Dodges it.
Oh, burns it fine. Perfect.
Perfect.
Get gone.
Clear this up as best he can. The fatigue is a slight issue at this point because
it's not right.
Depending on how many ignites he is actually going to end up casting. Yeah, this is the problem, right? Is that he will take a couple of ticks of the fatigue, and that is an issue.
Because of the Auctioneer.
Because of the Auctioneer and because of the turn passing back to him next turn as well.
Yeah, I guess he's still feeling safe at 16 and an Ice Barrier, right? That you've got to feel pretty confident at that. But I do wonder, I mean, the turn happened so fast, he played so many cards, I honestly can't tell you. But I do wonder if at some point he could have killed his Auctioneer. Because that's what a lot of the players do in this situation, right?
Yeah, absolutely something to think about in that spot. So only pushing 2 if he attacks here, Floki. So probably not worth. He does have max damage on the piercing shot.
There's no weird way to try and kill off his higher attack minions as well to try and make Viper keep the Auctioneer in hand.
I did think about that briefly, yeah, and was then also, well, you can just shoot your own Auctioneer, right? It's not even that much of a handicap.
Yeah, 1 ignite. Like.
The issue here, of course, is how much mana you have to pay for the ignites that go back in the deck and come out again. They are not affected by Incanter's Flow, which means the damage output for Viper is a little bit more limited than you might think it is.
Yep, normally this turn happens after Dawn Grasp has been played and not before, but Viper, of course, having to go to the extremes to level this game out.
Because here you see the problem, right? Like, sure, great. Viper can play a Varden and then put an Ignite in his deck. That's his turn. He's done at that point.
Does that Ruined Orb, though, to kill the Rhino?
Yeah. Awesome.
And really nice play from Floki as well, right? He got used out of the Rhino effect without proccing the Ice Barrier. Very big deal.
Wait, no, the Rhino was frozen. What do you mean?
Oh, sorry, Piercing Shot. Apologies.
Piercing
Apologies. It was
Shot,
Piercing Shot, not the Rhino. My bad. But again, if Varden is stuck on the board and that Rhino isn't dealt with, Floki probably will have the ability to overkill with the Rhino as well. Oh, isn't even going to play Varden. Going to go for the clear. Okay.
He's going to go for the clear, yeah. And it looks like he's about to ignite after the fact here as well. Yeah, Viper. Yesterday it took me a moment to understand the misplay that Viper felt like he made. That one a little bit more obvious. Yeah. Yep. Not great.
I'm out of cards.
Let's ignite number 2 back. You should be able to do this, right? With Arcane Intellects, 2 of. You can go ignite, intellect.
Arcane Intellect, ignite, yeah.
Yep.
Quest reward just ends up not being relevant. Very nice from Viper. Miss damage doesn't actually end up mattering.
Yeah, and Viper, a lot of the time watching him, even when we think, even when he's winning, even when it looks like the majority of plays are pretty clean, he does see the mistakes, right? And as you can tell, it does frustrate him, even though, yeah, he's won the game, it's fine. He got the ignites, he had the card draw to basically just keep drawing ignites and had enough to get the damage done. It still doesn't feel good, right? As a player, you're on camera, you know you can do better, and there's silly little mistakes happening as opposed to, the grand mistakes that you just think, oh, well, my brain turned off for a second. But still, Viper gets a hard-won victory, I would say, against Hunter here with this Mage, and that is a huge win. Mage, especially with Floki's lineup, could have been one of the decks that is very susceptible, and maybe he's the one that could get cleaned up.
I've just been slowly watching Floki's face just progress into deeper and deeper depths of depression as that game was going on. Just first flow, second flow, Auctioneer turn, whole board, frozen board, ignites. It just wanted out of that game as soon as possible. But you're absolutely right. It's a huge win for Viper to pick up because that's an outlier, right? Mage is not supposed to win that matchup. That was supposed to be a relatively straightforward win for the Face Hunter. And the fact that Viper's reversed and unfavorable in Conquest, particularly as you were saying with a deck that overall might just struggle to get out of the series, is a huge, huge deal. And he will now move on unscathed to his super aggro version of Quest Zoo, complete with Hecklefang Hyena and Knife Fender. Really the most aggressive version of this deck that you can possibly build. Lots of debate this week, of course, about Warlocks. So I went digging, just kind of separating out the stats into the different archetypes a little bit, and learned basically nothing. D6 Warlock is 8-7, slightly favoured overall. The Delete Warlock is 3-2, slightly favoured overall. Very small sample size because people generally only switch into it after the resubmission. It wasn't really played in the group stages. And then Viper's Warlock, which is kind of exclusive to Viper, is 3-1 for Viper. So really all versions of Warlock outside of the version of Warlock that hasn't made it to top 4, which is like the mid-rangey Zoo version, which kind of got dumpstered overall. These versions have all been slightly positive. So really, what it's shown is that any of these 3 Warlocks that have made it to the top 4 have been somewhat viable options, right? And that perhaps the mid-rangey Zoo one was the whiff for the week.
Yeah, breaking news here over in the European Grandmasters. Warlock's good.
Yeah.
Moving on.
I mean, we say that, but that's why I decided to like start breaking the stats down, right? Because when you look at it overall, Warlock has a 40% win rate, right? But, you know, all of the versions of Warlock that have made it to top 4 are the positive ones, which, you know, is kind of self-evident to a degree, I suppose, but kind of interesting when you actually break it down.
Now we'll dive into this matchup. It's a tough one. It's one I've not played or ran into too much, because honestly, I just don't see this version of Warlock too much on ladder, for example. But it's a tricky one, at least from the Hunter perspective, because on one hand, it feels like this deck does a lot of self-damage very early on in the game, where, for example, the D6 does it all in one turn a lot of the time, whereas this is kind of ticking constantly. But also, the minions that Viper's going to play in this list are kind of hard for the Hunter to kill, right? Like, Hunters are playing 1/1s and stuff, and, you know, like a 2/3 here and there, and like the minions for Viper, like the Flame Imp, there's then the other Imp as well, which is a 2/5, which is incredibly difficult for the Hunter to actually kill if it comes down on turn 2. So it's such just a weird matchup that Viper's going to try and kind of help Floki deal the damage to himself. But if Viper lands the board, Floki has to just hope he can draw enough, honestly, spell damage to get it done.
Yeah, for sure. Lorinda borrowed one of my phrases that I borrowed from our Lord and Savior, Reynad, a very, very long time ago, which is, you know, when Hunters play Warlocks, both players are trying to kill the same person. And yeah, never before has that been more true than with this version of the deck that Viper is playing. It was a big coming out party for Knifebender yesterday when Viper played, or was it whenever Viper played, that got through. It was yesterday, right? Because he won. He won
his group.
Yeah. So when he played yesterday, he got that Knifebender for the perfect lethal after having a super aggressive start. I hasten to say that this Knifebender might look a little bit more underwhelming that he has in hand right now.
I always play for a draw if need be, Sottle. It's one of the bonuses that you get with that card.
Yeah.
And you see as well there, very interesting, that it shows the respect against Hunter, right? He played Flame Imp on 1 because he's off coin, and saved the quest for a little bit later on because he'd just rather have that minion base nice and early. Doesn't want to get overrun by Hunter. And that's the card that I think is the absolute nightmare for Hunter to deal with right now.
That's disgusting. Nutty start.
Yeah.
Viper just goes face. Love it.
And look at Floki's response, right? As soon as the imp comes down, it's like, how do I kill that? He needs Kolek. Okay.
Second best outcome.
Yep.
I think he has to respect it, right?
No, I want this to be the most simple game of Hearthstone ever. Both players only go face. Because bear in mind, Viper's quest hasn't even been played yet. So there's even more time before the heal part of that quest kicks in. So maybe Floki's just like, yeah, let's go.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. My brain is seeing this start and pattern recognizing it as coin Bloodbound Imp into quest flaming, right? Because that's the start that ends up like this. That's a world of difference between what's actually happened here with Viper. So yeah, I can certainly respect the face race a lot more in this situation.
This one's a tough call because it's 1-for-1 minion and that puts you so wide and far ahead on board for Floki. But again, maybe I'm overzealous here, but I do just like it because the quest hasn't even been played yet. That costs 1 mana, which is a lot in this matchup right now. And then there's more self-damage that has to happen. If this 2-5, if Viper blinks, he has to spend time trading and dealing damage to himself.
You know that meme where it's like one image and then a picture of someone cleaning their glasses and then a second image? That like it's Viper just took off his glasses there, cleans them, puts them back on. Ah, damn, I'm still playing Face Hunter. That's not what I wanted to see.
A little agony goes a long
Dark Glare,
way.
attack, tap, quest. 17. He's at
He's
17
got 2
and
backfires
still,
and a knife fender in hand.
But still 0 on the quest as well, because it was the last thing he did that turn on top of everything else. That's a bad draw for Floki, though. Oh, disaster.
You just play it, go face. It's a shame because of kind of bad mana usage this turn.
Yeah.
But then he has War Song into buffed Rhino if he doesn't draw the Rhino in that crossover turn itself.
Well, here's the thing, right? Is if that's the plan, if you're going to go face with the 3 minions, wouldn't you just hero power over playing the Kolkar? Doesn't that like do more damage over the course of the game at that point? I feel like if you're ever playing the minion, you're trading, like Floki has done here.
Yeah, I can see it. I wouldn't have hated face purely because I think the trade goes against the Kolkar anyway, because I think Viper respects it, which then in a roundabout way gives you even more time.
Right. That's almost the only good card left in Viper's deck at this point, right?
Don't bother drawing the rest.
Out. That's huge. All right. Yeah, Floki just has to get the Rhino train going. It's still looking like it's going to be enough damage here with just how slow Viper has been on this quest so far. And just the amount of self-damage that he has in hand at the moment. There's some more. Stack them up.
I will say this game could get very crazy if he goes backfiring to Giant because the health attack, the buff from the Mosher on the Imp has a double effect on reducing the Giant because it deals damage and lifesteals in the same fashion. So I think his Giants are actually very, very cheap right now.
It's a Raise dead, so maybe if he can get the Minari Mosher dead, he can kind of use that to race instead. He's just going to rip it now, though, it looks like. He's currently 5 out of 6 on Quest Stage 1, so this will proc and heal him for 3. He will then get a Flame Imp from this, yeah.
A little agony goes a long way.
This ramps up, Flame Imp can come down, Tour Guide can come down, Tap can come down, and then the Touch can come down for the healing as well. If the Tap hits Giant, it hits Raise dead, okay. Keep going, I'm interested.
This 1-1 needs to die, though. Not even sure about this. Oh, I don't know.
I mean, I don't think the 1-1 dying is relevant. You're playing a Flame Imp. It's the difference between 1 health, right? Like, how big a difference actually is that in the long run?
Might be a lot.
Like, he's going to hold on to the Raise dead, though?
But it also means that the Rhino's much harder to kill, right?
That's true, yeah,
like it's a, what, 5 health Rhino after the 1-1 trade versus, what, 3 health?
But what are you going to do, right? Like, not kill the 3-2 and shoot your own 1-1 instead? Like, that's just absurd. You just kind of didn't really have any option to play around it.
Keep it simple.
And the fact that you got the Tour Guide down, which gave you a 0-mana tap while you had a Dark Layer on board, like, it has to be more upside to play the 1-1 in the first place, right? This Raise Dead hold is interesting on Viper's side as well, because it goes back to that point that I was talking about before, where maybe, like, if Rhino comes down, he can trade the Mosher into the Rhino and then play Raise Dead and put the Mosher
to try and
back on the Flame Imp on the other side. Or, you know, whichever of the demons doesn't die, right? Because Rhino's only going to kill one of the 2 demons that are currently in play, so you're going to have a target for it. It does just take max damage. That's currently 8 showing. Viper is the full 8 away from Tamsin right now.
Yeah, and with no ways to actually heal apart from a potential Mosher summon from Raise Dead at this moment in time. I doubt he's going to get there this turn for the Tamsin.
Yeah, I mean, the Mosher trade Raise Dead would have been an interesting way to try and roll to Tamsin, right? Because that's 3 damage for 0 mana that gains you a mana back, and then you're taking 3 damage for 2 mana that also gains you a mana back from the Hecklefang Hyena. So for the cost of 1 mana, you've taken 6 damage and potentially got the healing back with the Minari Mosher. But then when does the last point of self-damage come to get the Tamsin down without spending any more mana? I don't think it does, right?
And also, like, the issue is if you whiff on the Mosher, then probably just die at that point,
Yes.
right? Like, that's the other issue, isn't it? Because he knows there's another Rhino sitting in hand.
Sorry, we don't have anything.
Broom will probably come down here just for the tempo as well, and it does, yes. Oh! Oh, how does this even work?
Just doesn't, does it? So
Attack the Flame Imp?
no, I think he rolls Companion first, right? If he gets the 2-1, he can kill the Flame Imp and still Rhino the 1-1.
Okay.
Wait, and then hang on, can he? If he Rhinos the 1-1 at 7, he deals 6, puts him to 3, and then without any heals, barrack into a quick shot.
You can also just adorable the Rhino and attack the Flame Imp, right? Which is very similar and always kills the Flame Imp.
Sure.
Quickly.
I guess, but isn't Demon always better?
Isn't Demon always better? What do you mean?
So you either
Lots of demons.
Demon Companion from Hunter, right? Because it's either a 2-1, so you get to kill 2 minions.
Yeah.
It's a 2-2, so it's a taunt, which
Yeah.
you could argue saves him some health. Or it's Kolek, which it just does
Same job
what...
anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe. Oh, this end state was so complex the last few turns, right? Like on both sides.
I thought aggro was really simple and easy, Soto.
It's a Drain Soul. Viper is 2 damage away from Tamsin, still has a Dark Glare in play. The Drain Soul comes down, he goes up to 4. He can then take 2 more damage from the Imp.
Wait,
Get the Tamsin in play. He's just taking the
gonna
time.
go for the draw?
Okay. Is the game not winnable?
Are you a fan of mine?
Hang on.
Well, he can't attack with the Imp, right? Is that the problem there?
He can't attack with... Well, no, if he Drain Souls first, then he can attack with the Imp, right?
Right.
So then that gives him Tamsin in hand. Then he can play Tamsin,
Right.
and he can play Raise Dead. Can he not? And then at that point, does it still...
He'll be dead.
I'm struggling to, like, reconcile it in my head. Why would he be dead?
What health would he be on at that point?
Well, he'd have Tamsin in play. It doesn't matter.
Right, but he let me work it out here. So he does that. But wouldn't he just die from like hero power next turn? What health?
I'm saying, is it not just lethal the other way? Is what?
If
If you then raise dead and like hit a flame imp or something, like don't you end up killing the opponent on the other side? I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
Like I would love to go back and stare at that hand for a lot.
There's a lot to talk about. Yeah.
Viper in the end takes the tie, which means that we are back to the drawing board on this one, which is something he was entitled to do. And Braven, you called it out very, very early on. I said the Viper.
Profit.
I said that Knife Bender was going to look underwhelming. It did sit in hand being useless the entire game, which, I will still say is a big problem with the card Knife Bender. But in the end, it did activate that tie in the end. But yeah, if anyone in the caster Discord wants to go back and take a look at that last turn, I would very much appreciate it, because I think there were some possibilities there, right? But we will wait and see.
Yeah, it was really tricky. Like I said, I even just think about, although I might have oversimplified it, I do think that Demon Companion just overall just covered almost all of the bases, right? I'm not sure what outs that Viper could have got, which I guess if we talk about the taunt being the worst outcome for Floki, I'm not sure what cards would have punished the taunt that wouldn't have punished anything else. Again, we'd have to just go back and watch it and go through it all again. But I do just wonder, because especially if you got the great outcome, I think, of getting the 2-1, you kill the Flame Imp, kill the 1-1 to push max damage, and then suddenly it's like, well, how likely are you even to be lethal? Never mind whether you win next turn or not, because Barrack was always going to draw quick shot for 3 damage next turn at an absolute minimum worst case scenario. So a lot to talk about, honestly, in that game, and it was a lot more complicated than I think you would normally see. I'm not saying it's straightforward or easy, but that game specifically really came down to the wire, and you can even wind it all the way back to just how Viper played the opening. And I'm not saying it was correct or incorrect, it was just a weird opening to have to play out, right? He was so far behind on the quest because of how he chose to open, but what he did made sense in this scenario because he's facing down Hunter, and if Floki, say, went off with a pack runner early and Viper didn't have control of the board, or at least could contest control of the board, well, you don't win that game anyway because the board's then way too wide for Warlock to deal with. So a really intense and tricky matchup there from Viper and Floki.
Yeah, one of the most complex endgame states I could think of in an aggro mirror for quite some time when it got down to it. But you're right in that even the opening was a little bit off the wall, because normally, as I was saying, you're used to seeing that delayed quest start on coin, right? When you go coin Bloodbound Imp, and then you have those possibilities for starts with Tour Guide or Flame Imp alongside that to be able to line things up quickly, get a lot of power in play quickly, get Giants quickly. But speaking of Giants, that was the other big kicker for Viper, right? Is that's what would have changed that race significantly. There's two things, Giants or more Minari Moshes, right? Those would have been the two biggest deals overall for Viper, not really able to find either of them in the end.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I mentioned it. I think we're about turn 4-ish in the game, where because of the way Viper had played, yes, his quest activations weren't that far forward, but the actual just raw health changes, I think after the Mosher was played initially, was probably enough to make a Giant off the top playable, and then Hunter struggles when it's not already super far ahead on board, when there's just an 8-8 there, right? There's no deadly shots knocking about, it's super difficult to get freezing trap off if the board is already contested, as it was in that instance. So there was honestly just a lot in the air at that point. It was kind of just crazy. I'm looking forward to going back after the show and just going to rewatch, I think, just the whole game. I don't even think I would want to narrow it down to the last few turns because there was just that much going on, even from the early turns. Like I said, there was a point where Floki, when he played the pack runner, could have just pushed more damage to face. What impact would have that had in the game, considering he got so close in the end? It was just very, very close indeed.
Abar is currently telling me I'm right, and I like it when Papa Abar tells me I'm right. In regards to the Drain Soul heal, get the mana back with the attack because Dark Layer's still in play, get Tamsin down and then kill. So I'm going to go with that, and if it's wrong, blame our new head of esports because he's checked it and I haven't. There you go.
It's all Abar's fault. I believe we are just looking on time to see what's going on here with the players. I think it is a rematch, right? It's not both players take a win or a loss. I know that's a rule in some formats, but I'm pretty sure it's a rematch, right?
Again, my job is to broadcast the tournament. My job is not to make rulings. So I refuse to say things like that on broadcast because not my job. The rules are written and they should be enforced as they are written. That is the only comment I will ever make on rulings, and I'm 100% consistent.
Yeah, what I can say for sure is different tournaments have different rules. We are just waiting for the players to get going. I think they've just had a second there just with that draw to just, get everything sorted, get the matchups ready to go, make sure everything's okay. But overall, let's just zoom back in here to how the matchups play out. With the Viper being ahead, of course, with the win on the Mage, he's looking good. But in terms of lineups, what are you feeling here? Because they're both very similar, but Floki is actually playing that, the delete version of the Warlock. And do you think that's a bonus against this lineup from Viper or a negative at this point?
It's an interesting question. I think it's one of the better, it's probably the best version to have in straight up aggro mirrors, right? I think it's either between that or having a very fast version yourself as Viper does. We saw the pitfalls of what having Viper's very fast version can lead to when you play against a Face Hunter or a Doomhammer Shaman or something like that. So in terms of just a more off-board version of the Warlock, I think the delete version is the best because, of course, additional taunts, additional lifesteal, once you can get that Soul Rend off, and then just, of course, having Soul Rend as a card that you have access to is massive. So I think versus board-based decks, I think it is probably a good version of the deck to have. I'm not going to say it's the best version of the deck because we all know what the best version of the deck is. But overall, Heckle Fang Hyena Knife Vendor, that's the one. But yeah, I think it's a decently positioned deck, and certainly it is a deck that has a lot of supporters as well. I know a lot has been made of Orange recently tweeting out that he thinks it's top 5 decks ever that he has played in Hearthstone, which normally myself and Orange tend to align quite well on a wide range of opinions, both in and outside of Hearthstone, but in this case, buddy, nah, fam.
I will just point out, though, that Floki is playing what I would call Stage 1 delete Warlock, whereas I think Orange is referring to Stage 2, which has the Nulls and the Antarian in it. So again, that's just an extra layer. We're probably going to have to slap 5 more words on the name of that archetype as well next week if it's going to be knocking around, so we'll have to see. But there's a lot going on, and again, I think this is what's crazy about this expansion so far in the meta, is even within archetypes, there's about 50 different versions of these decks that everyone's trying out. We've not even had what I would say is a true glimpse into the power of Paladin at the moment, because it's either been banned or we've seen it, maybe once on stream over in Europe. I'm sure the other regions have been seeing it a little bit more, but there's a lot of respect being thrown around to Paladin, and that deck, at least comparatively to how we see Warlock, Mage, and a few other things right now, Druid, for example, is straightforward, right? The deck just tries to just plant minions and then buff and kill, and it feels like on one hand that can be a bit too straightforward for this meta with the power level of some other decks, especially the combo ones, but at least on ladder and in some other tournaments, some other regions, it seems to be performing pretty well.
It does, yes, and I think it's one of the best things about this metagame in general is I think there's a lot of very high power level decks, and it is people who detract from this kind of meta will call it a rock paper scissors meta, where kind of every deck has its place. Every deck has certain matchups that it can win, like even straight up control, right? Like control priest or control warrior, which a lot of people view as unplayable on ladder at the moment. There are good matchups for them, right? Like if you just queued into face hunter with the right build of control warrior, you do just fine, right? It's just that there's a huge chunk of these combo based decks overall, right. And I think that's a big benefit to the meta as a whole when it comes to tournament diversity, that players can have different opinions on what the right or wrong thing is, and that's honestly where players like Viper can shine, right? There's some metas where thinking outside the box isn't necessarily rewarded, but I think at the start of metas, and particularly at the start of a meta as powerful as this one, where so many different things are viable, a player like Viper who can really dig in deep might just be rewarded for some of that experimentation and being able to go off the wall a little bit.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to look at. And just to give you an update here on what's going to happen, apologies about the delay. I think admins are just talking to the players, just making sure everyone knows what happens in this weird version of the tie, is that both players will get a win. And you see that updated now at the bottom of your screen, just below Sol and myself, as there's a win for Viper. The Warlock's been ticked, but there's also a win for Floki as well. So both players effectively get that win, which means Viper now just has his Hunter and Floki has his Mage and Warlock left over there. So like I said, it is difficult off the top head to remember variations of rules because we've been casting a long time and there's been many different forms of rules within Hearthstone tournaments, but that is what it is in Grandmasters as of this moment. So the tie will be a replay in this scenario where it isn't a game deciding match. So now suddenly Sol Viper just has to bag a win with Face Hunter, and he has Mage to go up with, and then the Warlock here as well from Floki, and I'd be feeling pretty good if I was Viper right now, honestly.
Indeed, and it goes back to reflect on the decision to take the tie, right? Because currently I am of the opinion that it was a miss-lethal and could have been a game win. And again, A-Bar has checked that and agreed with me for what it's worth. But obviously that's a thing that Viper has to work out, and he could be wrong and he might not see it and blah, 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 blah. So if you're in a position where you're one ahead, taking a forced tie like that, which puts you to 2-1 and progresses you towards winning the series, essentially, like your Warlock still gets out of the series, might be a more justifiable decision. But of course, there's never a reason just to deliberately miss lethal. That's
right.
Nonsense.
Yes.
So that's a turn that definitely does need some looking at. It was an incredibly complex game of Hearthstone, and then it was an incredibly complex situation resulting from that game of Hearthstone afterwards. But yes, happy that we are wound up and we have what I believe to be the correct ruling. That is my understanding of the rules. But yet again, this is why I don't say what I think the rules are on air. I let the admins take care of things because that's their job.
Yeah, I mean, my comments were I'm not sure either, so I'll wait for word. Looking at Floki's Quest Mage here is a deck we are getting very used to seeing here in Grandmasters. There is slight differences in choices. No one maker for Floki that we've been seeing a little bit more often from some other players, but he's playing a Snap Freeze in there for just that extra freeze effect. And I think versus the Shattering Blast that people have been playing, it's a cheaper version of the effect, but has the drawback of requiring a target. So personally, I've been playing a lot of Mage in the past 24 hours or so just to brush up on it a little bit. And the...
Yeah, Elemental Mage, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Elemental Mage. Biggest bait ever. But for me, I don't feel as good about the Snap Freeze over, say, a Shattering Blast or none, and just playing something else in the list like a one maker, because you still have the same problem that you have against a lot of other decks that can afford to play around not playing, not leaving the turn with minions on board. But we'll see how it pays off. As Floki is playing against Hunter, and again, it's not often Hunter's in a good spot to just not play minions against you, so probably not going to come up in this specific matchup.
You would expect so, yes. But in general, again, going back to just the pattern of the series now, Viper is in a continuingly fantastic position, right? Because despite the fact that Viper won this matchup from the other side, he now has Face Hunter as his only deck left to get out of the series, going up against Mage on the other side. However, Floki is threatening to do exactly what Viper did to him straight back with the Incanter's Flow opening hand, but we will wait to see if the Flow's partner in crime will appear.
I think most importantly as well, though, Viper has a strong opening here, and I think, was that a full keep? He can go pack runner with coin and then just go super wide, and as I mentioned earlier, Mage has great removal, it has great stall, unless you've got a very wide board where suddenly Fire Sale becomes the #1 card draw in the deck when facing down something like this. And now there is a Neophyte in hand to protect the board after it's made, so this is looking pretty good for Viper, I think.
It is looking juicy indeed. Oh my, that is dumb board state that could be made now. What is the best way of going about this? Do you skip the Adorables now and just go like Kolkar, Coin, Intrepid? You go Intrepid, Coin, Neophyte to protect all of that and then pop off with the Kolkar and Adorables the next turn?
No, I think you go Kolkar with the Adorables because it goes as wide as possible. Or you go as wide as you can, actually. Hang on, let me look at this. But I think most importantly, you save Neophyte for next turn because that turn after is the Fire Sale turn, right?
Okay, that's very fair. Yeah, I like that.
Because if you go super wide this turn, whichever way is the best way to go maximum width on the board, then that's going to be the hardest to deal with for Floki on turn 3. And then the Neophyte comes down and just says, well, no Fire Sale for you.
Wow, this hand is a big old pile of nothing currently.
Yeah, there is a way for him to kill off the Kolkar, which is something. He would be very dead if he had no way to kill this Kolkar on board. He's actually going to prioritize the Kolek.
Yeah, which checks out. This will now draw as well, which could actually bail him out of a lot of trouble here if his deck is kind to him. I mean, that is pretty kind. But it's not the ideal situation. I think he would have preferred another piece of removal there over the second flow.
And now actually, Cult Neophyte with Adorable on the Kolkar doesn't look half bad either.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Mage kind of excels at dealing 2 and 3 damage at the moment, and not 4, so requiring or asking your opponent to spend 2 mana on a ping is actually a very big deal. In any matchup, actually, versus Mage at the moment, not just this one. He's not going to go Cult Neophyte. Madman.
I mean, I guess he's saying, unless it's exactly top deck Fire Sale that would cost 2, you're not killing the Kolkar anyway, right? Because he couldn't Fire Sale ping the Kolkar. So he's just saying he's okay with it.
Scares me.
I mean, that's a lot of freeze.
Is it? It's 2. And there's a lot of 1/1s on the board.
Yeah, you can at least ping a 1/1 though, right? Like, chances are at least reasonable that you can start to hit some of the 3 attack minions. It's just a nothing hand overall though, right? Like, what does it achieve?
Yeah, and the problem is the flurries are so much better next turn. It's hard to actually want to use them now.
Yeah.
It's this
thing
is just
is,
horrible.
Next turn you do so much potentially with Springwater, right? Like in the worlds where you win this game, you're going to play Springwater next turn, it's going to hit the other Springwater, right? And then you're going to play your whole deck. That's the plan. So maybe you're just saying, I'm going to clear this board anyway with like discounted Fire Sale next turn, so I don't need to reduce damage next turn because I'm killing this board. So instead, I'm just going to freeze it this turn. I think that probably makes the most sense.
I think I can get behind this more, right? I think he's going for 1 freeze, so then he can potentially activate Quest 1 next turn, then have Flurry to tick off the freeze box for next turn as well, and maybe try and go for double activation.
Ace attacks, hero power goes through, and much more simple game than the last one we looked at right now.
And right now, it's scary because Viper, I think, is at the point where he could just hero power this down.
Yes, it's very possible. Rune Orb, find another Arcane Intellect or another Cram Session or something. It's right, like you can Rune Orb for Primordial Studies first. I know he draws into the Primordial Studies now just for maximum amusement. Not sure about this ordering. Mask, Netherwind Portal, Rigged Fair Game are the options. So nothing, essentially. Nothing whatsoever. I think that is just death at this point. Primordial Studies into tradable, swap it for the fire spell? It has to be better than fireballing that, surely. You go Primordial Studies, you fish for the tradable spell damage minion, and then you cycle it looking for fire sale. Surely that's better.
What if you just play Netherwind?
Why? What is that?
If there's a spell played from Viper and it's like, I don't know, Big Tauntner wins the game.
Of all the suggestions, I was not prepared. I was not emotionally prepared for just play Netherwind.
Well, like all the Huffer variant basically do the same thing this turn. And the Elfite going to make this pretty horrible and close to unwinnable, if not just actually unwinnable now. Because yet again, it's 2 hero powers. Floki has to kill him in 2 turns if he can deal with this whole board.
Yeah, just
gonna
give it up.
It just cannot be done. Viper gonna take the victory, not only in this game, but in this series overall. Hunter takes down Mage, a tale as old as time at this point. And he is going to move to that finals match now to face either Gabby or Blythe. And what a series. It was very... it felt slow and fast at the same time, sort of, is where I'm going to go with this one. Some very aggressive matchups, but some very intricate setups, especially, I think, the highlight in this one being that first, the Hunter-Warlock matchup was pretty huge, honestly.
Yeah, the Hunter-Warlock game was insane. Like, every turn, my brain was just expanding, trying to think of just various lines that you can possibly take there. Every turn was super interesting, going all the way back to turn 1 for Viper not playing the quest. I do think, unfortunately, the game ended on a miss-lethal for Viper, but I guess if you're going to like scoreboard it, like he ended up winning the series anyway. Like his Warlock got out of the series during that game, so no harm done. But at the same time, me being me, I'm not going to let someone get away with what I think is a miss-lethal in that position. But either way, he's going to progress through to the finals, and that means the Orgrimmar script is still on, Raven, because Viper was our finalist out of the left-hand side of the bracket going into Orgrimmar. He faced Gabby in the final, of course, with the added beat that they had the same lineup with Viper getting